30-year veteran of the intelligence community. Then we're going to give you some actionable intelligence in the recruiting and hiring space, courtesy of the ClearanceJobs Founder and President, Evan Lesser, who kicked us off here today. So I am morally opposed to reading bios, but I just urge you to Google Charlie Sowell after this and look up his impressive career working in the intelligence community, working as a Navy commander, working across industry. I had a chance to interview him on the ClearanceJobs podcast years ago. So that's a blast from the past, Charlie, for sure. And now I'm really delighted to bring him to chat with us. So thanks again, Charlie, for taking the time to be on this webinar today.
Well, thank you, Lindy and Evan. It's great to be here, and hopefully I'm going to bring some good news to our attendees today, but great to be back with you.
Awesome. Well, first, I'd just like to discuss the status of the security clearance backlog. It's definitely something we've been talking about throughout, the past several years. We were hearing a lot about it this time last year, and prior to that, when it reached its peak of about 760,000 cases. But now that it's finally been reduced, we're not hearing as much. So Charlie can just give us that quick breakdown and update. What is the status of the security clearance backlog today?
Yeah, sure thing. And Lindy, let me start and do a little definition housekeeping. NBIB's inventory, so that's the number of cases they had on hand, reached a peak of, I think it was just under 726,000 cases, and that was in April 2018. And the normal number, which is sometimes what you call the steady state of NBIB and background investigations, is around 200 to 250,000 a year. So really the backlog would have been the difference between those two. And so it would have been somewhere between 426,000 and 526,000 cases back in April 2018. The current inventory, I'm pleased to report, is less than 350,000 cases. And I confirmed that last night with some senior executives over at NBIB. I think that's the number they're talking about publicly now. And as you can see on this slide, which is the kind of the PAC PMO, the Performance Accountability Council Program Management Office slide, the PAC PMO is really the organization that's overseeing security clearance reform and a number of the initiatives. And the highlighted box there showed the goal of reducing the inventory to a steady, sustainable state by March of 2021. And back in June, when this slide was produced, June 2019, the inventory had been reduced to about 433,000 cases. Well, now it's under 350,000 cases. So the bottom line is I think NBIB will be at steady state well before the end of calendar year 2019.
Awesome. Well, that's definitely good news. And I know we've talked and had a lot of conversations about this. I mean, obviously reducing the backlog is good, but the more important part for industry and especially for recruiters is kind of some of those process changes that have led to the success that they've had here. And you have a delightful slide that reviews those. The Navy would be so proud of this slide. But for me as an information person, it is a ton of great information. And so I do love this slide in that sense. So kind of walk us through just a few of the process improvements that NBIB has worked to make to get us where we are today. Where are some of the spots that they're still working out the kinks? Where are the really, success efforts in terms of where they've been able to reduce the backlog and try to get clearance processing times back on track?
Yeah, sure. And if you're a data geek like I am sometimes, this kind of slide can be both overwhelming and euphoric. It's a lot of data crammed into one little slide. Now, this is called, NBIB calls this a placemat, and they have placemats for all of their major customers. And if you think about their customers, it's the military services like Air Force, Navy, et cetera. But they also have Department of Energy, Veterans Affairs, and all kinds of other government organizations. And then they provide this placemat for industry. All the data that's displayed here is specific to those of us that are in companies in the cleared industry workforce. And so I think it's really relevant to your recruiters and managers in industry. And this is one of the improvements that NBIB had. It's sharing information. These dashboards are provided each month to members of the NISPAC, the National Industrial Security Program Policy Advisory Committee. And we host these placemats on the National Classification Management Society website for NISPAC publications. So you can see the historical placemats month to month. And if you were to look over the last 3 or 4 months, you would see that every month the numbers are dropping. So the business process improvements that NBIB is making are having a dramatic improvement. Now, it's not all BPR kind of stuff. I think the biggest factor in the inventory reduction has been NBIB's hiring, particularly of federal employees, federal investigators. But there are a lot of business transformation initiative improvements that might surprise our attendees. For example, today NBIB is using robotic process automation, and they're replacing the kind of mundane tasks that a human has to do repetitively, like opening 100 PDFs per investigation, and replacing that with automation. And so it frees up the workforce to be able to focus on more important things, like Evan and I were talking about earlier before the call, things like quality. And that's where you want your human workforce focused, is on quality and investigative actions, not just opening PDFs. They've also created dynamic dashboards. So the slide that you've got posted here is a static dashboard, but there is dynamic data behind it. One of the initiatives that NBIB has underway right now is providing a dashboard on investigation status where companies could come in to a GovCloud solution, go into a Tableau tool and view their company's data and only their company's data. And we're helping NBIB with that initiative right now, standing up a cloud environment for them and providing the hosting for that Tableau data. So we're really excited to be a part of the information sharing initiative. And then there are a couple of other things, hubbing and video teleconferencing, that are definitely big time contributors to the inventory reduction.
Awesome. Yeah, now speak a little bit to the hubbing. So we know that there's a few key focused on both companies and locations where they were taking advantage of hubbing to help reduce the backlog. So what exactly did that look like? How did NBIB identify where it was going to go? How did it work with those companies? And how is that different than how things have been done in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look in the very top center of this slide, you'll see top industry locations. And so no shock, Washington, Arlington, McLean, the DC metro area is where the biggest number of industry investigation items sit. And so that should be no surprise. But as you look throughout the rest of the list there, you'll see places like Los Angeles and El Segundo, Denver and Boulder, Colorado, Dallas and Fort Worth. And wherever you see that large number of investigative items, and think of an investigative item like this, if you split the investigation into all its piece parts, you would have some obvious ones like the subject interview, the employer reference interview, and things like that. And then maybe some less obvious ones like a school check, a criminal history check, a local neighborhood check. And all of those items, kind of center around the population, where the people who are getting clearances are from or are living in. Well, the most important item is subject interview when it comes to hubbing. And what NBIB did is it worked with both their government customers and industry members and identified where the kind of the hotspot populations of subject interviews were. So for example, with the Air Force, they went to an Air Force base and where there were a very large number of subject interviews that needed to take place. And instead of going one-on-one investigator to subject, they put all the investigators in a big hangar and brought all of the subjects that needed interviews together and just knocked them out. On industry, hubbing's been really successful too. In cases like in El Segundo, where Northrop Grumman has a large facility, NBIB's been able to create a hub, and through a combination of in-person investigation, subject interviews, and in video teleconferencing, they've been able to knock out cases left and right. I think one of the neat crossover examples for hubbing was at Lockheed Martin's Orlando, Florida office. And after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, travel was really restricted pretty much down to just emergency and disaster recovery personnel. And from the hub at Lockheed Martin's Orlando office, NBIB investigators were able to do, I think, around just over 400 video teleconference cases, and only 12 of those were for Lockheed Martin employees. The rest were for Coast Guard, FEMA, and other personnel in Puerto Rico. So I think the hubbing concept is here to stay. It really changes based on the number of subject interviews that need to be conducted and where those hot spots across the country are. But it's been a really, really good improvement to the process. And industry members like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and Boeing are currently hosting hubs where NBIB personnel go.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely a success story of what NBIB has done, is that they are really looking to partner with industry to create kind of process improvements that make the security clearance process better. And that directly impacts recruiters, because as recruiters know, when you have a dwindling pool of talent, and if it takes 450 days to process a new, top secret clearance, which is a number we've had for DoD industry for a while, that creates some significant market pressure where you do have to only hire that candidate who already has a clearance, and it has created this environment where poaching is the only way to do that, where you're competing with other companies, and that just creates a really tough dynamic. So we've talked a lot about the good news, but we do have to get into, Charlie, you're a happy guy, so I'm sure you'll find the positive news about it. But my pushback on NBIB has always been, like, we're seeing all these process improvements, the VTC, which is a great thing, the hubbing, we haven't yet seen processing times drop significantly. I think you have some good news on this slide here, but will we start to see that with these changes that you discussed from the previous slide, or what will it take as NBIB transitions into DCSA to see improvement times on clearance processing, which will impact recruiters because it will open up your talent pool, which is right now has been shrinking significantly.
Yeah, Lindy, and I appreciate that. And thanks to ClearanceJobs for bringing the reality to the story. Even when I'm a bit more optimistic, you keep it real. So I appreciate that. I would say, though, that this slide does represent a good news story in that overall the timeliness is improving for industry cases. So when you look at the top the light blue boxes there for secret tier 3 investigations, the number is at least holding steady. It dropped a day from 139 days to 138 days. So they're nowhere near what their targets are, but those numbers have dropped year over year. They've gone up from 140 days to 171 days for periodic reinvestigations, secret reinvestigations. But the reason for that is the note on the right-hand side, and it's that the most recent industry tier 3 periodic reinvestigations cases have a larger proportion of field work required. So you got to think of it like, it's easy to knock out your non-issue cases. Your cases that have a little bit more complexity to them, like your subject may have done a fair amount of overseas travel, or they might have overseas, foreign connections, things like that. Those cases just take more time. And so they've knocked out a lot of those. They are working on the harder cases, and I am very confident that with the inventory dropping to near a steady state level, you're going to see dramatic improvement on the timeliness next. I mean, when you look at the numbers for the TS population, and those are, some of the hottest candidates out there for our recruiters, those numbers have dropped dramatically year over year. And when you look at the reinvestigations numbers, those have really, really dropped from 606 days. I mean, ridiculous, close to, 2 years there. To around 249 days, and those numbers are dropping and dropping. So I think by the next NISPAC meeting, Lindy, you'll see even better improvements there. But it is going to take time. The focus, I think, on ensuring that NBIB maintains their workforce, both the federal workforce and the contractor investigators, continue that level of effort until the inventory is at steady state and timeliness is back to the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act required levels.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Charlie, for that update. And I'm going to pass it over again to Evan Lesser to give you some more actionable intelligence. I do want you to, the recruiters and hiring managers, a big part of having Charlie on this call is just to frame what you do within the context of the great challenges that you're facing, and gives you the opportunity to go back to your management and your companies and say, hey, this is what we're facing as an industry. We have, this is a period of very significant change. A lot is happening, and all of those kind of wonky, nuanced government policy changes that Charlie and I get really excited about do have a very direct impact on your ability to do your job. And it's a part of a much bigger struggle. There's a reason when I talk to, vice presidents and presidents of a lot of companies, they say staffing is their number one challenge right now. And it's a challenge because of all of these market pressures that we're seeing here. And the process improvements we're starting to see now could start to turn things around, and we'll continue to change the hiring market. And at ClearanceJobs, we're definitely committed to staying on top of that and giving that information to you. But we also know, again, you need really actionable tips and steps that you can take to improve your recruiting efforts and what you do. So now Evan Lesser, founder and president of ClearanceJobs, is going to kind of walk you through some steps to take and what to avoid as you're recruiting in this market. Thank you again, Evan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lindy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Perfect. And want to make sure you are seeing my screen as well.
Yep, I see your slide.
Awesome. We will jump right in then. So Charlie, thanks so much for that data. I think it's really helpful, and it is a bit positive considering all the kind of negative that we've heard over the years. So I'm going to get a little bit more tactical here, and wanted to remind everyone on our phone line that our lines are muted. If you have a question, you can ask a question to myself, to Lindy, to Charlie using the questions panel within the GoToWebinar app, and we will hit those in just a few minutes. So at a high level, there are really three pervasive marketplace dynamics that infiltrate everything that recruiting teams do. I think first is the fact that there are fewer cleared professionals than at any time since 9/11. The pool has decreased dramatically. And I don't think it's going out on a limb to say this reduction in cleared workers is at the detriment of national security. The good news is that the number seems to be leveling out a bit. So unless there's some government decree or massive government cybersecurity breach or other unknown factor, the total population of cleared people really can't get a whole lot lower. But what this means to recruiting teams is that there are fewer candidates to choose from, fewer than ever before. At the same time, there aren't enough new candidates entering the cleared talent pool. As Charlie noted, things are getting better, and the slide I've got here is not just industry, but DoD and industry together, so slightly different numbers than Charlie was showing. But there just aren't enough new candidates entering the cleared talent pool. Clearance processing is still taking way too long, even though there have been improvements, and that's kept the total population from growing. At the same time, those folks that are waiting, hundreds of days for a clearance are entering the cleared marketplace with kind of a bad taste in their mouth. They're seeing firsthand some of the frustrations that need to be addressed in clearance reform. I'm positive it'll happen over time, but not immediately. So as the DoD takes the reins again on the clearance investigation process, remember, it wasn't too terribly long ago they gave up this very process to the OPM due to problems with the quantity and quality of investigations. What's old is new again. But hopefully this time around, the DoD can succeed where others have failed. So while the candidate supply is at an all-time low, the total number of cleared jobs is at an all-time high. You can do the math. It's basic supply and demand. There aren't enough cleared workers to fill the massive number of open positions out there. Every day we see new government contracts being awarded, and they require cleared personnel. In some cases, those personnel just simply don't exist, or they exist in limited quantities, or would take an act of God to hire. So there haven't been slowdowns in contract awards, and the need for cleared workers is only going to get more severe over time. The last key factor that every recruiting team should fully understand and should, again, pervade their daily work, is that the vast majority of cleared workers in the current marketplace already have jobs. In fact, not only are most cleared people employed, they're actually fairly happy in their jobs. They're mostly satisfied in their work and their pay. So most of the cleared people that you guys as recruiters talk to will already have jobs. They're passive. So if recruiters approach a candidate assuming they're actively looking for a new job, they're projecting wishful thinking at best. Most of the candidates that recruiters talk to are employed. So the current cleared marketplace isn't like 2015 or 2013 or 2012. This is a new reality. And the sooner recruiting teams factor this into their mindsets, the better off they'll be, and the more realistically expectations will be set with their upper management. So what can you do about it? So we're going to jump into the top 5 things that ClearanceJobs knows your recruiting team should be doing. First, and probably most importantly, is talent pipelining. So many recruiting teams we talk to are fighting recruiting fires day after day, month after month, and they can never come up for air. So at some point, recruiting teams must take a step back and develop a more proactive approach to recruiting. If you aren't familiar with the idea of talent pipelining, it's simply a modified version of a sales funnel where candidate leads are aggregated at the top, they're nurtured into prospects, they're converted into interviews, job applications, or hires. So keep in mind that the smartest talent pipelining efforts, they're not just for current and future hiring needs, but it's all about anticipating backfills as well. It really means looking at your most critical roles within your company and creating pools of talent in anticipation that someday that person may leave and you'll be scrambling to refill that open role. So pipelining changes your team's mindset from reactive to proactive. As you take time to nurture your talent pipelines with marketing and messaging, you'll reduce your need for cold calling candidates, which is really a fool's errand in this tight marketplace. And speaking of cold calling, let's quickly talk about recruitment marketing. As noted earlier, the world has changed. You know, the cleared marketplace has changed. And if everything around you has changed, why are you still doing the same things you did when the world was different back in 2012 or 13 or 14 or 15? It's time to get with the program with regards to your recruitment marketing. And while you may have some limited success with old school candidate engagement tactics like job fairs or basic job postings or untargeted emails, these methods have really shown their age of late. They're far less effective than ever before due to the marketplace changes. But there are some ways to modernize these to reflect a younger, a more efficient, and technically adept audience. So we've personally seen success both within ClearanceJobs and from our clients when they try out fresh ideas, for example, for hiring events. Think happy hours, inviting candidate prospects into team building outings, more casual open houses, no suits and ties, very casual. Game nights, inviting them to check out guest speakers. Now, I don't want to disparage job postings too much because they do have their function in the marketplace. And we'll get into that topic specifically in a few slides. But what I want to encourage you to do is to create small, bite-sized job announcements of less than 30 words and find ways to get those in front of candidate prospects. These days, everyone is bombarded with content. And we're seeing people far more responsive to smaller bits of information initially with opportunities to learn more if desired. Also note that the job apply processes are stuck in the yesteryear. And honestly, candidates don't want to sit at a computer, create logins to every ATS, and fill out giant cumbersome forms and then never hear back from anybody. They call it the black hole. And the opportunity for you is to schedule live chat sessions, either via text, instant messaging, or voice over IP calls where you can directly engage with candidates in real time. The numbers in the data show that live conversations are effective and they're impactful. And lastly, I strongly urge you to do whatever you can to stop sending spam and hoping and praying that your email makes it into the hands of your ideal candidate. Spam does your company brand and your reputation more harm than good. There are a lot of opportunities now, both on the ClearanceJobs platform and off, for hyper-targeting of messaging. And in this case, quality truly trumps quantity every day of the week. So it's far better to send 25 hyper-targeted messages to prospective candidates than, let's say, 250 untargeted or lightly targeted messages. Another 5 must-do is to ensure you're conducting thorough entrance and exit interviews with your employees. So most companies I've found are pretty good about doing exit interviews, but very few take the time to really understand why a candidate chose your company over another. So entrance interviews are an ideal time where a recruiting team can really fully comprehend what marketing messages that they're sending are resonating and which failed to impress a candidate. Over time, they can learn what the candidates thought of your recruiting and your onboarding process and how to improve it. And you can gain business intelligence on competitors' benefits and competitors' compensation. Most importantly, you can hone your messaging tactics, retool, and processes, based on real and current feedback. So let's quickly get real on employee retention. As you know, losing a valuable team member costs money, it costs time, it has a huge impact on morale and employee productivity. So unfortunately, we see most companies not spending nearly as much time on employee retention as they do on employee recruitment. In reality, they should be equal. After all, if you guys spend, let's say, 5 months filling a really tough to fill position, only to have that person leave, you're back to square one. So we did a recent cleared worker survey on ClearanceJobs, and we found out that 84% of cleared professionals were at least somewhat likely to change employers in the next year. That's a huge number, the highest we've ever seen. So with so many companies offering signing bonuses and aggressive compensation packages, it isn't surprising. In addition, with uncleared unemployment just extremely low, security cleared candidates told us that over 52% of them had received multiple job offers from companies outside of the cleared marketplace. This is really bad for all of us because these folks are leaving the cleared industry and they're letting their clearances expire. We didn't see this back in 2013 or 2012, but we're definitely seeing it now. As we noted at the front end of this webinar, we can't afford to lose any cleared workers from the total talent pool. I'd encourage you all to also put, equal emphasis and seriousness on employee retention as you do on hiring. There are a lot of questions your team should be asking itself surrounding retention, but the top 5 are here. By taking retention seriously in a really methodical and data-centric manner, you can get some great learnings that help you keep your best employees in place. So let's shift to talk about the top 5 things that recruiting teams should avoid. So first, for everyone's sake, we urge you to put an end to cold calling candidates. It just doesn't work in this marketplace. It may have worked 5 or 6 years ago. It doesn't work now. When you've got 80% of candidates passive, they're not entirely interested in hearing from you. And when they see what you see here on screen, the chances of them answering that call are pretty slim. It's kind of silly, but it makes sense. Like dating or courtship, you've got to slowly warm up your candidate prospects, and cold calling them is akin to asking their hand in marriage on the first date. Bad idea. So with candidates being so security conscious, they bristle away from getting calls like the one you see on screen here. I get them all the time. Don't do it. What has been working for employers is engaging with candidates over live communication channels on trusted platforms like ClearanceJobs. So using ClearanceJobs message as an example, you're able to chat with candidates live in real time, and they have full details on who you are and who you work for, and they know you've been vetted by us. Similarly, when you call candidates using ClearanceJobs voice, it means they see you. It means they know who's calling them, and there's a level of trust you just can't get on an unannounced phone call. The next tactic to avoid is contacting candidates on LinkedIn. The internet's largest professional network has turned into the premier recruiting tool for foreign intelligence officers. So that's right. Just even today, we saw another article came out. Today's was in the New York Times. And it went into a lot of detail about how LinkedIn has become the preferred platform for spies to find people to exploit. It's a national security scandal just ready to blow. Do you guys want your company all over the news? it's really time to examine how we all use LinkedIn and tamp down or eliminate it as a recruiting and communication source. Its effectiveness has waned over the years, and now it's just downright dangerous. As we touched on earlier, another must-avoid tactic is sending untargeted email. It's so 2009 to send spam. Candidates hate it, and honestly, most email platforms are now smart enough to block unwanted or untargeted email before your candidate prospect can even see it come in, so why send it? 55% of all email sent is known to be unsolicited, 55%. As I mentioned earlier, the current trend is hyper-targeting. You can use platforms like ClearanceJobs, there are a lot of other platforms as well, to really focus your message in on uber-specific groups or set up lots of criteria to ensure your messages are targeted. Again, these days, it's all about quality over quantity. 10 hyper-targeted emails are far more valuable than 1,000 unsolicited, untargeted messages. Use the tools that are provided in modern email and communication platforms and get into that type of hyper-targeting. The next thing we're telling recruiters and recruiting teams to avoid is relying solely or mostly on job postings to make hires. The bulk of your hires will be made by pipelining talent, by nurturing candidate prospects into leads, and engaging candidates one-to-one when the time is right. Now, don't get me wrong, job postings still have a place in modern recruiting, but it's not to make hires. Standard basic job postings these days are more about branding. They're about spreading your hiring messages, about gaining exposure. They're all about keeping your company's name at the top of candidates' minds. So when they are actively job hunting, they're thinking about you and not some other company. Remember, with 80% of cleared professionals being employed, passive, and uninterested in giant, 10-paragraph long job postings, an over-reliance on them will mean failure for your recruiting teams. Post your jobs for sure, but don't expect your ideal candidate to apply and present themselves to you on a silver platter. It's just not going to happen in this marketplace. Until things turn around, post your jobs, but don't rely on them like you did years ago. And last but not least is skipping from first base and trying to make a home run without going all the way around. Nurturing candidate prospects into leads is so important in this tight marketplace. Candidates are getting bombarded with messages, and you want yours to stick out in a good way, that is. So at this point, candidates are getting hit with so many requests to apply for jobs, so many pleas to view their job, to please return my phone call. It all is just noise. So what sticks out? How can you make an impression on candidates that's memorable? What sticks out are helpful messages, helpful resources. If you can provide information and data to cleared professionals, they will remember you. They'll remember your company and how helpful and not pushy you were. So go for the soft sell. The hard sell may have worked in the past, but in today's tight marketplace with so few candidates to go around and so few candidates actively job hunting, they're going to remember you from the soft sell. So that brings me to the end of my portion. Again, I wanted to let you guys know that you can ask questions using the questions panel within the GoToWebinar app. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lindy, and she's going to ask those questions and try to assign them as best as she can to either me or Charlie or both of us. And Lindy, there may be some that you want to answer as well.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you again, Evan, I think a webinar like this is great because it gives you tips that you can really take back and start implementing today. I mean, there's things that you can do. It's a tough market, but you have a lot of power in your hands and with the tools that we have at ClearanceJobs to use to help improve your chances of finding success. So the first question I have, and I'm hoping, Charlie, I can punt it to you, and then Evan, you might want to chime in as well, but you kind of gave the government overview and update. Does NBIB understand that what they're doing process-wise has an impact on these workforce issues? I mean, I know that's kind of an existential question, but maybe you're in a lot of those meetings and things like that. Did they kind of see the cause effect of what's going on in the marketplace?
100%, Lindy. the fact that NBIB is sharing the amount of data that they are and really opening their doors and showing you exactly what's going on, I think indicates that they get it. They want to share not just the good news stories, but also just the fact of where things stand. And I'll tell you, since my time in government, I have not had better access to data on what's really going on in the investigative process. And that's all, I think, due to the fact that Charlie Sowell, the director of NBIB and the acting director at the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, flat out told his team, I want us to do a better job of information sharing with our industry partners. And then I think the last thing that's a good indicator that they get it is I spent about the last 4 or 5 months up until July traveling with NBIB around the country to those hot spots where there were a lot of subject interviews that were needing to take place. And we were giving briefings to the chief security officers and facility security officers, and even some senior executives at companies around the country. And that was, I think, a really good thing, sharing the stories of what's going on and showing that NBIB gets it. It is a real problem. And as Evan and you have said, this is directly impacting our companies, our viability, and our ability to support our customers.
Awesome. And Lindy, I can add just a little bit to that. I think the NBIB obviously has done a really good job of getting the word out about some of the improvements. One of the areas that I know the government is really kind of far behind on is their public relations and lack thereof. And what I mean by that is, over the last 7, 8, 9 years, it's really become unattractive for a lot of people to work for government or to work for industry. Post 9/11, there was this just amazing patriotism that drove a lot of people into public service, and people, went out of business and academia to go work for government and to go to work for government contracting companies. And since 9/11, that's kind of faded. And over the past 7 or 8 years, things like Edward Snowden, the OPM hack, Aaron Alexis, reality winner, and changing perceptions around privacy have really cast a negative light around what it means to be a civil servant and what it means to work for, the NSA or CIA or FBI, or to work for government or work for industry. And this year, as we've spent a whole lot of time talking to government, we've really urged them to take that public relations campaign really seriously and to work just as hard as industry is working to let younger generations know that working for government is good. It's patriotic. It is responsible. It's a great way to help out your country as well as have a good career. And I think that's something that will have a positive impact on recruiting going forward if the government can get into it. So any of our industry friends on the line today, if you have contacts with government, we urge you to do whatever you can to bring it up the chain of command, that anything government can do to cast working for government industry in a positive light to younger generations is going to help us down the road.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think, like I said, that it brings us to a great point, because we do all these candidate surveys, and someone had asked about, the survey where we got the stat on the percentage of folks who are likely to change jobs. We had a 21,000 candidate survey. In our compensation survey last year, we reran a salary satisfaction survey, and ironically got almost the same number, even from a different response group. And people cite salary as clearly a #1 driver for changing jobs, but right behind that, in every poll that we've run, is mission and being excited about the work that they do. And that's where recruiters have a direct opportunity to really sell the mission and the excitement of the work that's going on, and candidates still care about that. And that's a story that government uniquely has in terms of what they're giving back. So we had a good question. I wanted to send it to you, Evan, about how to nurture candidates. So what does that look like? Like, are there certain messages that you use and that you don't use? You put something in your pipeline. What does it look like to nurture that candidate?
Yeah, so we have a webinar, a masterclass webinar that we do on ClearanceJobs, specifically around talent pipelining. And a lot of that has to do with the nurturing aspect. And, you know, I only touched on it briefly here, but in that webinar, we talk about how the candidate pipeline is really borrowed from the traditional sales pipeline. And, you know, sales pipelines have been around since the 1950s. And, you know, the idea is that you load in all of your leads, all your prospects at the top of the funnel. And then in the middle, you're nurturing them through some type of marketing or outreach. And then, you know, at the very bottom, they come down to the few candidates you want to act on. And I think what's important to remember for our industry friends on the line today is that you're not just competing with other defense, intelligence, and homeland security companies. These days, you're competing with companies like Facebook and Amazon, you know, companies that are kind of on the periphery of defense and intelligence and homeland security, but are, you know, into high technology. And those companies are the ones that you should emulate with regards to candidate engagement. So one of the slides, and I'll see if I can pull it back up here, we talk about engagement and nurturing. You know, videos, photos, they go a really long way. Just sending text to candidates is not the greatest idea. You know, people want to see, they want to understand, they want to learn. So to get down to the nitty gritty, some of the things I've seen that have been really impactful, they don't have to be slick, you know, super overproduced videos or, you know, professionally taken photos. Everyone's cell phones are good enough these days. Show off your workplace, you know, take a 15-second video and tell candidates what it's like to work at your company. Make a 30-second video where you're interviewing, you know, one of your chief engineers, talking about some of the technology they use. You know, make a 30-second video where you're talking to the CEO of the company about benefits and why, you know, why it makes sense to work there and what the company's mission is. You know, put up a photo collage showing some of the work-life balance. You know, create a quick and dirty podcast using your phone, talking about, you know, some of the tools and technologies that the company's using or some of the agencies they're supporting. You know, most of these engagement and soft sell kind of things can be done directly from a smartphone or a laptop computer. They don't have to be slick. They don't have to be overproduced. But these things is really more about quantity. So you want to get as much content as you can out there, because the more content you get, the more likely it's going to be found by the right people.
Great. And then we did have a question related to the always popular topic of reciprocity. So I don't want to dive too much into the wickets, but I know, Charlie, maybe you could speak to that a little bit. There's a lot going on with government in terms of improving reciprocity. Is there anything that you could touch on there in terms of what the government is looking to do? I know, you know, the new National Background Information System will play a part of that, improving the technology. And then there's also, you know, some policy and legislative tasks that are happening as well.
Yeah, you hit me with one of the areas that I don't have any good news to deliver. In fact, I think reciprocity is probably our biggest challenge that we're going to face as continuous evaluation and continuous vetting gets rolling. And the reason for that is each agency and each department will have kind of a standard set of checks that all of you know, folks that are cleared and are enrolled in a continuous evaluation program will get. But then each agency can do their own thing. So you could have Department of Defense with 150 checks. You could have Health and Human Services with 10, and you could have Homeland Security with 52. And although the DNI is pretty much given, I would say, fairly clear guidance that a cleared employee is supposed to transition seamlessly across all those three agencies and departments, I would be just flat out lying if I said that was what I expect to have happen. I think we're going to see a lot of problems with reciprocity in the next few years. Even as the investigation timelines come down, that's not one that I'm optimistic on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and it points to, I do always say, you know, again, for the recruiters asking that for clearance jobs, you can search by, you know, clearance issuing agency on the site. And I encourage people to start their search there and then know, I mean, that's why having a pipeline is really important with those issues as well. So identifying candidates that have the clearance and the skills And again, using some of the tactics that Evan mentioned earlier to nurture those candidates so that you can have them available when you need them. We had another interesting question that's always near and dear to my heart related to LPTA and contract prices. So it kind of ties into what you're talking about, Charlie. The government has realized that addressing the backlog required hiring new investigators. And we saw that, we've seen that slide deck. They vastly increased their investigative capacity by bringing on new background investigators. So again, we have that same, the demand for cyber talent being so high. So why does the government, continue to award LPTA contracts? I'm not sure if you feel like putting on your COO hat and speculating on that one at all. I talked to a lot of companies who just say they just won't bid on those types of contracts anymore because they simply cannot find the talent. So again, maybe if that happens enough, but do you have any thoughts, from your perspective about, does the government kind of realize that model doesn't work anymore, or do you continue to see it in play as this recruiter's mentioning?
I still see LPTA affecting us, whether it's real or just kind of the shock that we've all lived through. And I'll give you some examples. Even when contracts are listed as best value evaluation types, I rarely see companies bidding top price or even reasonable prices. It's still a race to the bottom because of that fear that while the government says they're going to rate technical higher than past performance and past performance higher than price, where price is least applicable, we're still seeing cases where the awards are being made to the lowest price companies. And so until that stops, until awards are not being made to the lowest price, despite that company not being the highest technically rated or something like that, I think we're going to continue to suffer the real LPTA syndrome and just the kind of the after effects of it. Because I'm not seeing a lot of LPTA evaluation criteria come out anymore, but I am sure seeing the industry competitors applying an LPTA mindset to it. And as you know, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think it's a surprise to any of our listeners. Even when it's not LPTA, there's a disconnect between our company BD people and the recruiting teams. The recruiters are pushing for price realism, and the business developers are pushing for win-win-win. So I think we're still seeing that disconnect.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good transition to another question we had, Evan, that maybe you can hop on. So you talk about job postings. A boring job posting is not going to get interest from candidates. But what if my program manager has all these requirements for all this convoluted language that they need to require? How do I take a really dry job posting that I feel required and obligated to publish all of these requirements and make it something a candidate is going to be interested in?
Yeah, so again, I want to reiterate that we're definitely not telling you to not post your long-form jobs. You want to post your long-form jobs because they are great search engine fodder. It's great for attracting candidates. It's great for branding. It's great for getting your name out there. And at some point, you're going to want to push candidates to that long-form job posting. What we're suggesting is that when you are getting your jobs in front of candidates, that you don't rely on the full posting at the start. You rely on that at the end. What you want to do, and Tamara actually asked this question, you want to keep your text-heavy job posting, but you also want to create a very small, short blurb. And again, I hate to bring this back to online dating, but it's completely analogous. If you were out there looking for a mate, you want to get the 30,000 foot view. You want to get the high level summary really quick. You don't want to sit and read, a 10 paragraph background on this, prospective mate. You want to just get the high level bit of information. And if that's interesting, then you may want to dig in deeper. So you're not going to ever fully go, do away with text heavy job postings, but you also want to have a short, engaging, small, 30 word or less blurb that you can utilize in tweets, utilize in text messages, utilize in instant messages, and other ways that you can reach out to candidates. Start off with the small messages, pique their interest, and then go into something more formal with the long-form job posting.
Awesome. And then we had another question that I know, I mean, this is definitely in the weeds, but I think it's important because we hear this feedback from recruiters using chat. I need to hire cleared engineers who are working in a skiff all day. How do I know when they're going to be online? How do we adjust our messaging, knowing that, again, especially candidates in the cleared space aren't always going to be working your 9 to 5. I think most recruiters in our space kind of have an understanding of that. But do you have any thoughts or feedback there, Evan?
Yeah, I sure do. And one of the things, we know from looking at our server logs that most employers utilize the ClearanceJobs site on their desktop or laptop computers, which is great. But I did want to let you know that ClearanceJobs works fabulously on your phone or on your tablet. And as far as engineers go, you're right. A lot of them are sitting in a skiff. A lot of them, have these very standard hours. What I found works really well is I will send a message through the ClearanceJobs site over to an engineer, and I'll say, let me know when would be a good time to chat. And when I say chat, I mean on the ClearanceJobs site using the message tool. I don't necessarily mean voice to start off with. I always start off with live chat. And more often than not, I'll get a response back from the engineer saying, that's cool, contact me at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, or contact me at 8 p.m. Eastern, or whatever. It's going to be off hours in many cases. And sometimes they'll say, I'm leaving the office, I can chat with you during my lunch break or whatever. But I have found that instant messaging has been a great first step with engineers specifically. I don't want to stereotype these folks, but they're much more likely to sit there and type and text with you on a trusted platform than to pick up the phone. So I did see Graziella ask that question. If their engineers are not online during regular business hours, just ask them, what's a good time that you and I can chat live here on the ClearanceJobs site. And I think more than often than not, you'll get some type of response back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, if you're tailoring your message and you're reaching out, to candidates, I think, it shows also that you're understanding and interested. They're not just in this market, they're not just sitting there waiting for your call, but my husband worked in a skiff for a number of years and used it very successfully as an excuse to ignore my calls. But I knew he went to lunch every day, and he would check his phone then. So recruiters kind of have the same thing. Most folks, even if they're working in a skiff or taking a lunch break or in this phone addicted market, they're able to access it sometime during the day. And again, it's just another aspect of caring about their work. It's interesting the work that they do, that they're working in a skiff, and yeah, they're probably going to step out at some point. So if you can be there and available and chat with them at those times,
Yeah, and Lindy, one other point I'll make is, and I think this is a really important one, is that when you're reaching out to a cleared candidate, and I don't care whether they're a software developer or Intel analyst or an engineer or trainer or whatever, when you reach out to them, you don't say, hey, systems engineer, when's a good time that we could talk about your career? That's a hard sell. Whenever I reach out to a cleared professional, the first thing I do is I connect with them on the ClearanceJobs site. And the second thing I do is I say, hey, I just connected with you. I'd love to learn more about, what your favorite tools are that you use on the job. Or I'd love to get your feedback on what tech certifications are hot right now. Or I'd love to know what you think about the last time you had a clearance reinvestigation and how long it took. So I always start off with a soft approach. I work my way in to getting the candidate's attention. Candidates love to answer questions. They love to talk about their, what they need and what they want and what they like and what they don't like. If you come to an engineer and the first thing you say is, hey, I want to talk to you about a great job I've got for you, that's going to fall on deaf ears. But if you can come to them, ask a question, come in with a soft approach, more often than not, you're going to get some type of response back to them.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to address another status question too. So, Laura had asked about the disconnect between we have, 3.4 million DoD clearance holders and 65,000 cleared job openings. Those are just the job listings that we have on ClearanceJobs. There's certainly a number of other jobs out there, but it just shows there is this disconnect of openings that are out there and then a very limited pool of talent. And then again, we've kind of showed the funnels here at ClearanceJobs in terms of new people being processed for security clearances. It is relative to the proportion of current openings. It's a very small number that's being churned out in new investigations. And even when clearance processing times pick up, that will help recruiters in the sense that they will be able to clear new folks faster, but it's going to take years to build up to a place where we had before, where we're processing people as quickly and where, you know, potentially we have, you know, a number of clearances. And then maybe Charlie can speak to that, because I know, I don't know if it was the same time when you were with OD&I, but they had this major push that they wanted to reduce the number of clearances. And that created this kind of disconnect where at one time we had more than 5 million people with security clearances. You know, OD&I pushed out a memo to do desk audits and say, do these people really need clearances? That was as a reaction to the things, you know, Evan mentioned, all the insider threats that we had, Edward Snowden, all of that. And it made a lot of sense, but in addition to, you know, the perfect storm of other things that happened, kind of left us in this market. So do you think we'll get to a point where they will loosen that a little bit? Or do you think the mindset from OD&I is very much, we really had way too many people with privileged access, with security clearances? Are they paying attention to those numbers to keep it low, or what's the mindset there?
Yeah, Lindy, the guidance is still to only give clearances to those who need it. You know, the OD&I memo that came out basically instructed agencies to get rid of clearances for folks that were eligible but weren't in access, that didn't need access to classified information. And theoretically, that makes a lot of sense. But to all of our folks that are listening, you know, I mean, that just kills the bench that we use for proposing you know, available talent and having a bench of employees that can go to work tomorrow if we win this particular job. So I think it's going to have to loosen up. But you know, the one thing that would kill that is if we saw another string of unauthorized disclosures or espionage events, because that's just what causes the security community to want to lock things down again. So, you know, I don't know the answer, but I do think things will start to loosen up again unless we see a new spate of espionage cases or unauthorized disclosures.
Yeah, it's that balance we always talk about. We're really worried about processing times until the next insider threat happens or a major, you know, thing, and then we're back to quality. So quality versus quantity will always, I mean, I think it's always been an issue in our industry. So I think related to that, we had a question. I'm trying to drill back into it. But one of the things that Charlie Phelan had discussed, my other favorite Charlie, was specifically, you know, do you want people to be overqualified that are in these positions, or do you want people to be underqualified? You know, do we want people that, you know, the issue for him in his role at NBIB, at least, is in his Senate testimony, was always, you know, less concerned about the number of people with clearances and more concerned that, you know, the people that do have access need that access, and that people, you know, people are qualified for their positions, and if that qualification is a security clearance, we want them to have it and not just reduce the number to arbitrarily reduce the number. So I wanted to pump back to Evan again and see if there's anything I hadn't touched on or any other questions I hadn't addressed that he wanted to make sure that we got through, and then we'll wrap up our Q&A. There were a few people that asked about slides. We'll definitely be providing the slides, and any questions that didn't get addressed, you know, in these few minutes, we will certainly reach out individually and address those as well. But Evan, if there's anything that you saw come in, I wanted to give you a chance to respond.
No, not necessarily. We do see questions from Andrea, Tamara, Michael, Darlene, Zachary, Arthur, Jeff, Rena, and we're actually going to answer those directly within the GoToWebinar app. But I think as far as the general questions, I think we've hit them all, Lindy.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Charlie. I know, like I say, we touched on, you know, the patriotism aspect of it, and that's why I love having you here, because, you know, you served in the military, you served in government, you served in industry, and you have a real understanding of the importance of giving back and mission. And I think, if I can give our recruiters one thing, I think here at ClearanceJobs, we really respect and value the work that you do. We want to give you the tools to give to your leadership, including this slide deck, including, having conversations like this, because you are a part of a much bigger story. And the mission of doing national security work is important work, and the mission of finding the people to fill those jobs is important work. So I hope it gets you excited to do the work that you're doing despite the challenges. And again, Charlie, I just really appreciate your being on the phone and being available to to answer questions and have a conversation and share the good news of what NBIB has accomplished and what DCSA will hopefully continue to accomplish.
Hey, well, thanks, Evan and Lindy, and thanks to ClearanceJobs for all the work you're doing, keeping us informed and prepared to address these issues. You really are a great voice on all these topics, and it's much appreciated.
Awesome. I'm going to stop talking and let Evan close this down. But thank you again, everybody, for joining the webinar. I really appreciated it.
Folks, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate your patronage. If you're a ClearanceJobs subscriber, if you're not, please get in touch with us and see how we can help you out. For those of you who have questions we've not answered, we're actually in the process now of answering them directly within the GoToWebinar app. You'll see it pop up on your screen in just a moment. But with that, we will stop the webinar, and thanks so much for the time today, guys. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.